The underlying issues aren't going away. We have to address them. That's why we're retraining our police force. That's why we're moving towards body cameras and a lot of other reforms.
The population changes, and cops need to change with it. A more dangerous population, to be certain, but one that now demands law enforcement back off and play nice, some would say. Now we find out if it's possible to reconcile those two ends of the need to keep the peace in America. He is a retired New York City police sergeant with more than 20 years on the force, former commanding officer of the Bronx Cold Case Squad, now an adjunct in the Law, Police Science, and Criminal Justice Administration Department at the John Jay College of Criminal Justice in New York. It's a pleasure to welcome Detective Sergeant Joe Giacalone to MidPoint. Detective Sergeant, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Ed.
We hear the words body cams. It seems to now be the big phrase that everybody wants to use whenever anything comes up with regard to what we have seen happen in America in the last few months. Are we kidding ourselves about body cams being the great solution to everything that's happening?
Yes, I mean, body cams are going to be good for a lot of reasons, but there are a lot of consequences that the public doesn't understand, and maybe some even police departments don't understand yet.
Tell us about those consequences, please.
Okay, well, first of all, I mean, they're going to have, first of all, you're going to have less interactions between the police and the public. If a police officer has a camera on them, that proactive policing component that we've seen over the last 20 years that has helped reduce crime nearly 50% in this country, I think you're going to see a lot less of it. I think some police officers are going to take that mental stance where I'm not going to get involved unless I have to. And that's just one of the unfortunate consequences that nobody's really talking about yet.
Wouldn't that then go fly in the face of the police training? Because as many people would say, the police are trained, go in, you put your life on the line. So if they were to stop because of a body camera, would that not make people think that the cops are trying to hide something?
Well, not so much stop listen, the police are always going to answer the 911 calls that they have to. It's some of these proactive measures that are kind of under attack now, like stop, question, and frisk, and those kind of issues. Those are the things we're going to see a lot less of.
What about racial profiling? Because that certainly is something else that people say that dash cams will immediately stop because the cops themselves will not want to be caught and, again, called up and said, why did you stop somebody simply because of their color? You agree with that?
Well, I mean, I look at it this way. From the idealistic point of view, you hope no police officer ever does this. But, I mean, there's shown some evidence that there has been racial profiling in the past. But understand something. These video cameras will protect the public from those cops that shouldn't have been cops in the first place. But it'll also prevent the cops from most of these false allegations that are made against them. And we've already seen that happen.
Would you agree, though, there are some and many people that I've spoken to in law enforcement who say that racial profiling is a necessary part of the job of being a police officer and being able to figure out who the bad guys are? You agree with that evaluation?
Well, no, I don't, in the respect that, I mean, I worked in some of the toughest precincts in New York City, including Brownsville, Brooklyn, which when I was there in the 1990s, late 1980s, late 1990s, the issue that comes down to is that you have a population which is nearly 100% African American. So as a white police officer, anybody I stopped would have considered it as racial profiling. So we also have to, use a common sense approach to some of these situations that we're dealing with in that respect. I mean, think about it. The numbers would be off the charts if you had white police officers in a place like Brownsville or any other place that has a high minority population.
Let's use some common sense here with regard to body cams. A couple minutes before we take a break here. Do you feel that people, if you were to go up to and talk to somebody about a case, would they be reticent to talk to a cop knowing that they're being recorded, not knowing where it's going? Would they then likely clam up? And this is then an unintended effect of having these body cams that you're going to impede an investigation and stop witnesses from coming forward?
Well, that's the other consequence that nobody's talking about. I mean, we already have this no snitching mentality now that somebody might be on videotape. They don't know if it's going to end up on the news or what have you. I mean, this is something that, the police departments and the public really have to look at. These knee-jerk reactions, when it deals with law enforcement, in the end, they always look back and say, what did we do?
So is that all we're dealing with right now, in your opinion, a knee-jerk reaction with regard to this whole body camera issue?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, do we need some of them out there? Should have some of them been out there beforehand? Yes, but we also need to get out some of these non-lethal weapons out there also, like more tasers out there. And, quite frankly, we need to have some supervision or better supervision out there when out on patrol.
All right, now I want you to stand by for a minute because you actually just started to walk into the next part that we're going to discuss here in a couple of minutes, so please stand by. Other side of the break, we're going to dive into the issues of training and psych evaluations. Because if you remember, we had Sergeant Dorsey from Los Angeles, a former sergeant with the LAPD, tell us just last week that she believes that cops need much better psychological evaluations. That's a part. Law enforcement has to change its way of doing business in a changing society. But what about society itself? And at 34 minutes after the hour, a child watching the attack on Pearl Harbor from her backyard. She is now determined that no one will ever forget that day. Stay with us as MidPoint continues.